Good morning, everyone. We are live. Welcome to another Read Aloud with me, Charles R. Smith Jr. Today, the book we'll be featuring is Brick by Brick. Now, Brick by Brick is a historical piece of nonfiction. It focuses on how the White House was built, which was by slaves. Now, it wasn't only slaves. There were other people involved, which you'll learn about. So right now, we got nobody on the chat, nobody hanging out or anything. So I'm just going to adjust my light real quick, and then I'm just going to jump right into it. All right, looks like we got one person checking in. Let's just adjust the light a little bit. It's a really gray day out here where I am. So the natural light that normally would be filling in the background is just not there. So good morning, Adiris. Good to see you. Looks like we got 3 people joining. 2 with 1 thumbs up. And Keika, of course. Good to see you, Keika and Adiris. I'm so glad you guys are here. I always love seeing you here. So with that, let's get started. All right, Brick by Brick. Now, of my books, Brick by Brick was a really fun and interesting book to research. Since it talks about, thank you, I'm glad you like my shirt, Keika. I love Bob Marley, and it's all about one love. Brick by Brick talks about, actually the idea for Brick by Brick did not come from me. It actually came from my editor. My editor, for you students out there, your editor is, my editor is like your teacher. That's the person that I turn my book into, and they say, fix that, fix this. So one day my editor reached out to me and said, hey, did you know that slaves built the White House? And I said, oddly enough, I did not know that. I mean, it makes perfect sense that they would, but it's not something you necessarily think about. And she said, well, in our adult book division, we just had a book that came out that talked about how the Capitol was built and how the White House was built. And I wanted to do a children's version. Let's see. All right, go to class, Adiris. Remember, this will be archived on the website, so you can always see it. So thanks for stopping in, and check back soon. So it looks like it's just me and Keika again. Looks like a few more people are there. If you are watching and you want to join in the chat, you can ask me some questions. Since this is a nonfiction book, I often get a lot of questions about this. So back to the story. So my editor reached out and she said, would you like to do a book on it? And I said, sure. And as I started doing research, I used the adult book that she was talking about, but then I found plenty of other ones, and I had a lot of fun researching it. So let's get to it. Brick by Brick, illustrated by Floyd Cooper, who killed it. I'm going to leave soon because I have a meeting for school and I have a guest coming. All right, Keika, it's all good. I'm just glad you guys stopped in. You've been consistent. Brick by Brick. I got the pages marked. Under a hazy, hot summer sun, many hands work together as one. The president of a new country needs a new home, so many hands work together as one. And there's the picture. So these pictures I will show, since this is not a one-off poem or anything, since this is continuous. Let's see. Oh, we got somebody new. Daniel. 5th grade socials would love to share this read aloud. Beautiful. I'm so glad that you can share this with your students, Daniel. So if you have any questions for me as I'm going through, feel free to ask in the chat, and I'll answer as best as I can. All right. This one has a lot of little behind-the-scenes stories, so I'll try to tell them as I go along, so you get a little bit more than just a story, because it's a pretty short book. So the first thing that I'll talk about super quick is, as you can see, that's a picture of George Washington. He was the first president. He's looking out over nothing. We know Washington, D.C. now is a big sprawling city, but the reason that they chose D.C. to be the home of the White House is because there was nothing there. It was just a big swamp like where Shrek lived. Amy, we got a new person. Awesome. Working on an assignment for my master's in library science. Can't wait to hear the story. Beautiful. Awesome. And like I said, anybody has questions, I can see you in the chat. Just let me know. We're going to continue. Black hands, white hands, free hands, slave hands. Slave hands dig, saw, and break stone, laying the foundation for the president's home. Rented as property, slave hands labor as diggers of stone, sawyers, and bricklayers. There we go. I know it is good to have new people, huh, Keika, other than just me and you. But hey, I love seeing you, Keika, and I love seeing the new folks, so I hope you enjoy. And that's the picture. Now, when I speak in schools, this page is one that I particularly show because it kind of sums up what the slaves had to go through. Slave hands swing axes 12 hours a day, but slave owners take. Slave hands pay. Slave hands sweat under a bright sun. Slave hands toil until each day is done. And there's a picture. So basically, when I talk about this page when I'm in schools, I don't really read this book because it's meant to be read, and I just don't read my books in schools. I perform individual poems. But in this page in particular, you get to see the hard work that they're doing. And one thing that I stress to the kids, that they would normally have gotten paid, but since they were slaves, they were considered property, the same way you would consider a horse property or a wheelbarrow property. They were considered property, so they did not get the money. The money went to their owners. Chiseling, carving, and transporting stone. Slave hands ache, dark skin to white bone. Slave hands blister under a bright hazy sun. Slave hands toil until each day is done. Here's a picture. Now, the phrase that you'll hear me commonly repeating throughout the book is slave hands. And that's because the White House was built. It started in 1792. And when it was started, there was no machines. I shouldn't even say started, but when it was built, there was no machines. It was all pure labor, hands. Hand is also a word for a helper, a laborer, a farm hand, a ranch hand. So it not only refers to the hands that are actually doing the work, but the people who are working as the hand. Sawyers saw blades through logs of oak wood 7 days a week where a forest once stood. Alec, Ben, William, Moses, Simon, Peter, Frank, Thomas. Up, down, push, pull. 2 men per pit saw, spraying sawdust until slave hands are raw. And there's the image. This is one of my favorites from Floyd. Now, I mentioned some names. The reason that I mention names is because often when we hear books talking about slavery, we only hear slave, slave, slave. We forget that these were actual people. And in my research, I came across a really great primary resource that showed actual manifests of the names of people that worked on the White House. And so I really wanted to use them to refer to them by their name, because then that puts a face on them, makes them more real. Okay. Clay, sand, and water is mixed by young slave hands to create bricks. Nameless, faceless, daughters and sons built brick by brick until each day is done. And this is one of my favorite pictures, and this is one that I also show when I'm speaking in schools. Daniel says, I think, he said, yes, but just checking, will this video be available to show my students? Yes, Daniel. Once it is recorded, even though it's live, it will be archived onto my site. I can basically choose to keep it or not, and I'm going to keep it. All right. So this is another picture that I show when I speak in schools, because I'm usually speaking to younger grades. And I let them know that even though most slaves were, like myself, big, strong men, that didn't mean that the women and the children didn't have jobs to do as well. So kids, if you were a child, then you would spend your days making clay because you had the small hands to do that. If you had an older brother or sister who was maybe in high school, their job would be to make bricks because they had to deal with fire. Nothing to do with what made me start books. That's a little bit of a long question, but what I will say, Keika, that was Keika's question. What made me start books? What did make me start doing books was my photography. I had some pictures. Somebody said you should turn them into a book. I had so much fun doing the book, which is my very first book, Rim Shots. And I said, let me just keep doing this. And now I got 32 plus books and multiple awards. So I guess I chose the right career. Let's continue. Slave hands crack under a hot, hazy sun. Slave hands toil until each day is done. Slave hands learn new trade skills using chisels, saws, hammers, and drills. Skilled hands earn 1 shilling per day, reaching slave hands closer to freedom with pay. There's the image. Bye, Keika. So glad to have you back again. And like I said, it's great to see all the new folks, but thanks for stopping in again, Keika. So one of the things that you saw earlier in the book is that slaves were doing the work. That was mostly on the outside. That was laborers. That was a lot of hard work just to get the land where it needed to be and then raise it up. Once they moved inside, the jobs became more skill-based. And that's where a lot of the immigrants came in. They often had their own unique skill, but they still had the slaves. So they would teach slaves a skill. And if a slave got to earn a skill, they got to earn some money. That money they would use to purchase their freedom. Now, one time when I was speaking in a school, a child asked a very simple question, which I agreed with. She says, why do you have to purchase freedom? Like you're born free? Well, yes and no. Back then, if you were a slave and you were born, you were not born free, even though technically we are born free. And so you basically needed to find, you need to pay for a paper that says nobody owns me. I am a free Black person. And so that's what the slaves were saving their money for, was to get that sheet of paper. Seems really silly, but that's what it was. And we're nearing the end already. Freedom has a price in a land of liberty, so slave hands toil to no longer be property. Slave hands build and slave hands save shillings to be free and no longer a slave. Slave hands count shillings with worn fingertips and purchase freedom earned brick by brick. And that is the end. Quick little short book. So I see we still got some folks. I'll take some questions if you got them in the chat, but I'll give you a couple minutes or so. But otherwise, I'll tell you a little background about some things, and then we'll cut it short. We'll keep this a nice, short, sweet one. So Amy says, why, thank you, Amy. Well, you know, I have to, as a librarian student, I think it is, I really pride myself on using the knowledge that the librarians have to point me in the direction of primary resources. So for any student out there, and you're wondering, what is a primary resource? A primary resource means firsthand information. So that means it's not coming from a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend. It's coming straight from the source. And I try to get all of my primary resources, use primary resources for my books, because that way there's no question. Yes. Can I talk about the primary resources that I did? Sure, Daniel. When I started doing my search, one of the books that I found was online, and it was a really thick book that had long gone out of print, but the writer, the author, had done all of this research that I basically simplified into a 32-page book. But they had the manifest, they had the date, they had all of the information, and it was archived online. They showed pictures of the manifest and things like that. So that was my primary resource, which I do mention in the back. Yeah, Rob Arnebeck, Through a Fiery Trial. And if you look up, it's Arnebeck, Arnebeck is the last name. Rob is the first name. Through a Fiery Trial, Building Washington, 1790 to 1800. It's a really thick series of books. I think it was a series. It might have just been one, but it had so much detailed information that became my primary resource, in addition to the book that my editor had mentioned in the first place. When it comes to historical fiction, research is everything, because if your facts don't sit on a solid foundation, then your whole book will crumble apart. Thank you, Daniel. I'm glad you enjoyed that. So really, I'm going to keep it right there. We're at 13.5 minutes. This is one of my shorter reads. This is the end of poetry month. Today is Thursday. Yes, this is the end of poetry month, but I still got plenty of other books. So next week, the Read-Alouds are going to feature two of my most popular books. Next Tuesday is May 5th. So I figured let's celebrate Cinco de Mayo with my book, I Am the World. So I did the words and the pictures for this. So I'll talk a little bit about each of them, but it's a celebration of the world. And then the following Thursday, because I try to do these reads on Tuesdays and Thursdays, the following Thursday will be the book that came before this, that inspired this one, and that is I Am America. And I know that I Am America is one of my most popular books because every time I speak about it at schools, I get to see kids and teachers have done lots of work on it. I get to see good sales on it. And it's a really popular book too. So I'm going to have a whole lot of fun next week. So 10 a.m., May 5th. and May 7th. I'll see you then. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Leave a comment if you liked it, and ask some questions if you had any more that came to mind about Brick by Brick, and I'll reply to them. Otherwise, that's it. Thank you all. Thanks for stopping in, and I'll see you next week.